Hey guys, welcome back to HotS Thoughts. Today I am going to be going over the announcement that Blizzard just made concerning the HGC 2017 circuit. So a lot of people are really excited about this. They announced something that's kind of like the LCS for Heroes of the Storm, and everybody's really excited. This feels like we're moving in the right direction, like we're going someplace that feels very esportsy. But I actually think this is kind of a problem in a lot of ways. There are a lot of issues that come up when I start thinking about a league format in Heroes of the Storm. Now, before I tear into it completely, let me just explain what it is and what they're trying to do. So, we look here. All right, we've got this is the press release. So, biggest thing is in all of the major regions, they're going to be going to a league format, okay? And the teams will be contracted and guaranteed both compensation and regular competition, and will have a lot more consistency in terms of rosters, scheduling, casting, and broadcasts. We'll have quote-unquote more international events, matching rival teams from different regions against one another. Small regions can also look forward to local competitions that feed into international events. And they'll also be introducing a promotion and relegation system to kind of keep the leagues fresh, right? So, good stuff, absolutely great stuff, is scheduling and casting and the quality broadcast. This is something that I've been talking about all year, and it's the problem that there is no central source at all for information for Heroes of the Storm. Like, you can go to their esports website, but it doesn't have information on, China or Taiwan or any of the smaller regions. Even if we had stuff for like the top 4 regions, EU, NA, China, and Korea, like if we just had those resources alone, like it would be so much better. This would be so much better. So I'm looking forward to this and seeing if they can actually put this together, because being able to actually look up the games that I want to watch in a central location, be able to watch them, be able to see the same casters every time instead of having to figure out like, oh, who's the community caster casting this qualifier type of thing. I can actually just go to the website and find it. I don't have to go through Reddit or Twitter and try to look for the answers. So that's really great. That's like there are a lot of bad things that I see about this, but that is one that is absolutely awesome. And also the fact that they said they'll contract teams. Actually, this says they contract the players and guarantee them compensation. So that's awesome, because one of the things that we have a problem with in Heroes of the Storm right now is it's very feast or famine, and I'll get into that a little bit more. So let me go into how I expect this system to work. Okay, so here's how the league format in 2017 will work. They haven't actually announced what exactly it'll be, but here's what I see. Basically, it's an online version of LCS, right? So qualifiers, we'll have qualifiers in November and December of this year, 2016, to determine the placements for Season 1 in the league. The top 8 teams from the qualifiers will go ahead and be placed into the league. All right? And those top 8 teams will play in an online league format over the next 2 or 3 months, similar to the spring, summer, fall season that we're seeing currently. And the top teams at the end of that time period will go on to global championships. So essentially what this means is we'll have basically elongated qualifiers. Instead of having qualifiers to go to a regional championship and then go to a global championship, we'll just have a longer league format that will eventually feed into the global championship. Now, I don't believe there will be any regional competitions as part of the established league format and league system, but there is a chance that we may see them, like, I don't know, randomly roll it into like a DreamHack or roll it into some ESL event like Gamescom or something like that. But who knows? There might still be regional events. As far as the league placement goes, when the top 2 teams from the region go to the global championship, then we'll also have the bottom 2 teams facing relegation against the winners of the open qualifiers, aka Challenger League. And so basically, the open qualifiers will be a set of, what they said is it'll be a set of weekly tournaments that I imagine will probably run for those 2 or 3 months. And over the course of time, it'll be pretty much like open qualifiers are now, except for you're just gaining points. And at the end of it, the team with the most points gets to move on, and the top 2 teams with the most points get to go on and face the bottom 2 teams from the HGC League, aka Premier League, for a shot at getting into the Premier League. Minor regions, it says for minor regions that they would be promised more tournaments and local competitions that will feed into global events. But essentially what that means is they're not touching minor regions at all. Minor regions will stay exactly the same. It's mostly everything that has to do with the major regions and all of that. So what is my problem with this? My biggest problem is the fact that we're imposing a league format, a very tried and trusted format that has been played in the LCS, has been played in League of Legends. We're imposing that on Heroes of the Storm, and in theory, that's great because it's a good format. It has grown the LCS, and it's, you know, fantastic for the teams or whatever. It's the growth of esports. The problem with that, I think, are the numbers. One of the things that I always say is, like, you can't compare Heroes to League of Legends. Like, it just doesn't make sense to try to compare the two to one another. You can't say that, oh, we're going to impose this league format that is watched by, you know, millions of people worldwide, you know, every year. We're going to impose that on this thing that gets, you know, 5 to 10K concurrent viewers for every tournament. Like, that's, like, the difference is astounding. Like, we're not even like 10% of the way to an LCS. So that's one reason why I worry about this. What it means is that we won't be able to actually have as good a system as LCS is. One of the biggest problems that we have right now is there are not really a lot of stable teams at all. And even the teams that are stable, or at least the organizations that are stable, constantly go through roster changes and stuff like that. So one of the biggest problems that we have right now is, for instance, last year at NA regionals, for instance, the only team that went to every single NA regional was Niventic. That was the only team that stayed consistent throughout the entire year. And we saw a couple of other teams, like C9 went to, you know, 1 to 2, I guess. And I guess they were at last one as Denial. So that, you know, you can make an argument there, but it's really hard to find more than like 4 teams per region. In EU, it's been My Insanity, now Misfits, Dignitas, and Fnatic have been at all the events, and everything else has just been traded out teams and players. And China and Korea are very similar. A lot of dominance from these top like 2 to 3 teams, and then lots of other teams that are just constantly being swapped out. So the problem with that is the Premier League for HGC is not going to be very good competition. We're going to see league matches that are going to occur, you know, every week over the course of several months, and probably about 80% of those are just going to be throwaway matches, like matches that just don't even matter. Like no one's going to even care about them, because it's going to be between these top teams that are just completely smashing these lower tier teams. And so what that means is I think we're actually going to see a lot less viewership, and especially since it's more regular and there's less about these big moments and things like that, there's going to be a lot less viewership overall during these league times, which is weird because the league should be like the core of what we want to watch. That should be, you know, people tune in constantly to say like, oh, all the leagues on today. Like, you know, when you watch LCS, you're like, oh, NA LCS is on, I'm gonna go watch that right now. You can't. It won't be like that for HGC because the quality of games just won't be there, and as a result, the viewership will actually drop lower than it is already, which is pretty terrifying. So there's that, and then there's also the instability of roster swaps and things like that. So one of the things that I have always been very wary of is the instability of the hero scene, especially in North America. North America has probably one of the most unstable scenes with people dropping left and right and changing teams and stuff like that. So it's been really, really awkward to try to form a scene over here because, like I said, Naventic is the only one that's been around, and you know, the top like 15 players are all on teams, and everyone else just kind of like flows in and out, and they're good or bad. And we saw even with this fall qualifier, it's difficult to really even fill up an entire qualifier with people because there really aren't that many teams. There aren't that many people playing on a competitive level. So I think it's very hard to fill up this league and keep it stable to where we have a pretty standard returning, you know, 6 to 8 teams where you're like, oh yeah, I know those guys. Those guys are awesome, or those guys are amazing. It just kind of, the relegation system just provides a revolving door over a longer period of time. And the other problem is player trades and roster swaps. So one of the biggest problems that we had last year in 2015 was the Road to BlizzCon teams were locked as soon as they qualified. So teams that were, so qualifiers actually started in July, I believe. They started in June actually. So it was like June, July, August, September, October, November. Yeah, it was 6 months where some of the teams like Cloud9 or Tempo Storm couldn't actually they couldn't actually do any roster swaps because they were locked in all the way back in June or July. So, and that became like one of the biggest points that we made going into BlizzCon was, oh my gosh, like, you know, there's a lot of tension on Tempo Storm. They're having a lot of problems internally. Even Cloud9 suffered from this a little bit. I mean, they did well at BlizzCon, obviously. They won. But as soon as they won, they went off to China, and they were having some consistency issues over there. Cohesive problems where they were trying to, you know, do stuff, but the players are going in different directions. And that eventually led to their breakup. But one of the things that I always try to keep in mind is we tried really, really hard to get away from that. In the spring season, we had roster swaps that were a lot less rigid than the Road to BlizzCon, but they were still pretty rigid. And in particular, one of the things that was driving a lot of people crazy were the regional requirements. If you remember the Free Wiz campaign, which, you know, now that I think about it, really didn't go anywhere because Wiz just went over and played Overwatch and none of it fucking mattered. But anyways, the point is, we campaigned really hard to try to get those international boundaries changed a little bit so that you didn't have to pick up a player an entire season in advance, pay them salary, and move them to the US before you could actually play with them. So we worked really, really hard on that. And I'm not entirely sure the way that LCS does it, but I believe you can technically trade anybody within the Riot League system, as long as as long as it's approved by Riot. So we run into issues now where teams are either stuck with players for a really, really long time, players that don't mesh well with a team. You know, you hit it off early and you happen to do very well over the course of a season, but cracks start to form and the team starts to kind of fall apart come the globals. Either you have that kind of problem, or you have this problem where you can't really, like, if you have like a player at the very beginning of the season that doesn't work out very well, but somehow you made it into the HGC because the bottom two spots are really not competitive at all, then, you know, you're kind of stuck with those people throughout the entire league, whether or not you like them. If they do impose some rules that allow you to do player swaps, it's still going to be it's going to be a lot more rigid than it is right now. And some people might say, oh, that's great. That's a great incentive. Like, if we force the teams to stay together, we create roster stability and the scene becomes a lot more stable overall. But that's not true. Like the 2015 example, forcing players to stay together is not good. Giving them incentives for staying together is. So in this system, staying together with your team and gaining points over the course of a season via a league thing makes sense. But at the same time, there is the problem where if you do want to swap, like, you have to do that. And this also creates a lot of problems where the disparity between the bottom teams and the top teams is going to grow even larger. So, for instance, one of the things that we saw in the North America roster apocalypse recently was we saw a lot of player shuffling, and players from lower tier teams ended up on these top tier teams. People like Biggie, people like Tomster, who am I trying to think of, like Cladius, for instance, trying to think, APM, aka Matra. So, like, all of those people moved from basically, you know, bottom tier, you know, like 7, 8, 7, 8, like sometimes like 5, 6 teams, all the way up to like the very top teams. The problem with a league tournament, and when you have things that are accumulating points, is suddenly it makes no sense to trade for a player on a lower tier team. So for instance, like, unless you really believe that they will help you out. So, like, say for instance, now I can either, like, if I'm Naventic and I have a real problem with Kenma, I can swap Kenma out for someone else in the lower leagues. What that means is, like, Kenma's not going to want to do that lightly. That's not going to be a player swap that's going to work. And what may end up happening is we just have to let Kenma go altogether because Kenma doesn't want to be on a losing team, right? But if Kenma, like, wants to be on a winning team still, like, we can maybe, like, you know, lower our range a little bit and look for people in the top 2 or 3, you know, and trade between them. And that's going to become the standard, is people are always going to start trading either in the top tiers or in the lower tiers. It's not going to be a lot of cross-trading anymore. At least not until the end of the season, at the very end of the year. Then we might see some changes as the season kind of reshuffles itself. So that's one worry I have. There's going to be a greater disparity between the top teams and the lower teams, and the 7th and 8th spots in the HGC League won't matter at all because it's literally just randoms that won a tournament by accident. It's just, ugh. And the other thing that really bothers me is the fact that this is online. So the quality of games is also going to be lower. Again, this adds to uh, lower viewers, lower overall quality, because we're basically just going to see a lot of online games that, you know, will be affected by things like lag and things like that. And there's no protection versus DDoS or something like that. So if one of the players randomly gets DDoS, then I mean it is up to them to protect themselves, but if they get DDoS, then we just don't have a game and they have to forfeit, and that's that. Right? That's no good. So I don't think this is a very good format. I think in the long run, in a short run, it'll be great. So it'll be awesome because, you know, random teams like, you know, say Chew8 gets together, like he says, you know, I feel like playing again. Let me get together a team, Chew8 Hot Doge, and so they get together and they play through the open qualifier, you know, weekly tournaments, and they just smash every open tournament, no problem. Like, they're good players. They don't really care about the other players. They smash every open tournament. They get to the qualification match. They play like a bottom tier team. Like, I'm trying to think of one that's pretty low right now. I would say TNC, but they just broke up. Nice was one that we saw at Bloodlust, for instance. So, like, I don't know, somehow Nice gets into the 8th spot, and Shuei just goes, oh, okay, we'll just play Nice. So they beat Nice. Now they're in the league. Awesome. This is cool. They're in the league. They get paid compensation over the next 2 or 3 months. That's awesome. It's really good. But that's gonna end at some point. You know, say someone else comes in and they're pretty good. They blow through all the qualifiers. They beat Chew8, and now he's out of it. So it's stability, but it's not long-term stability. Right? For organizations, relegation has always been a problem in the LCS because it's essentially death to organizations. Particularly some of these startup organizations that are just trying to get their feet off the ground. You know, in LCS, they invest, you know, like $1 million just to get into the LCS, just to get through Challenger League, get good enough players to go through Challenger League and get into the LCS. And then, you know, when they get relegated, it's suddenly like, well, we don't have any more money now. Like, we can't afford to pay our players. Sponsorships aren't going to pay for us to just like wait around and twiddle our thumbs and try again, you know, in 2 or 3 months. Like, that's just, it's over. It's over. And so that's one of the problems that I foresee with the HGC League as well, is these bottom like, you know, 7, 8, even the 5th, 6th teams aren't really actually making a steady income. And if they are, if Blizzard is just like shelling out tons of money, like raining cash on all these teams, then it doesn't even matter, because they can't sustain that long term, especially, as I said before, with lower viewership slowly dropping. It's going to be much harder for them to sustain this long term because there isn't enough interest and there isn't enough players in the scene to make it competitive and worth watching. Now, I hate to say this because, like, I love the game and I think it's really enjoyable. But I think we're just not at a level where we can impose this like large-scale league system onto this game. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I've thought about solutions before. So we talked a lot about solutions after the last NA Fall Regional, when Kimma and Vandy just kind of went on a crazy spell, you know, like, oh, this isn't fair, like, one best of 5 determines how good we are, or whether or not we go to BlizzCon. I'm writing an article right now about that sort of thing and solutions to it. But one of the things that got brought up a lot was, you know, if we do have regionals and things like that, we need to have a lower bracket. We need to have double elimination. I'm about to sneeze. On. There it is. Sorry about that. I will try to lower the volume in the VOD. All right. That was a strong sneeze. Anyhow, so one of the things that was put in was we need a double elimination bracket. And I was personally kind of against this. I was like, well, you know, LCS doesn't do it, and they're doing fine. But as it turns out, LCS is actually doing that next year. So I think it's pretty straightforward that whenever we have global tournaments and things like that, we need to start doing double elimination, because it's the best format. If we don't do double elimination for the playoffs, then it's not worth it. It's not worth doing. So there's that. That's one solution that kind of helps bring everything together. And to be honest, I think the tournament format that we had this year was not bad. Or other than the other biggest issue was just the regional match tiebreakers. Those did not make a lot of sense, but I think there's ways that we can work around that. When you have 2 regionals per season, what you end up doing is you end up having this weird situation where it's like, well, what if both team wins both times? Like, well, we can just have like the second place team from the first one play the second place team from the second one, and then we'll get the in a best of 3 match, and then that'll decide who gets to go to the globals. I mean, you know, to some degree that makes sense, but the way in which it was done was really poor. You end up with weird situations like what happened to Misfits, where Misfits, despite being the better team, straight up, were forced to play another best of 3 after playing like an exhausting, you know, 10 matches or whatever. Before that, they were forced to play another best of 3 at the very end of the day against Fnatic. And that's just kind of unfair. Like that's something that really should have been done, you know, the next day, backstage or offline or something like that. That was really not correct at all. And the same thing happened in NA during the fall regional as well. We had the second place team, Denial, versus Gale Force. And this is another one of those awkward times where it doesn't really feel all that fair, because like Naventic, their aggregate place overall was much higher than both Gale Force and Nile. They were the better team overall between the 2 events, but as a result, we had these 2 teams that did fairly okay or fairly poorly move on to go to Blizz, or at least move on to play a tiebreaker to go to BlizzCon. So that was one of the issues that came up with this double regional format. Now there are some ways around it. You can just try to do some sort of point-based system where the regional, where your placement is based on like a point system. I really strongly believe in maybe doing like a full point system throughout the year, where you credit points to teams and individual players. And basically this allows interesting interactions where the more a team wins, the more valuable they are, the more the players on the team are worth, but you still have the kind of open-ended ability to trade people around without having the really strong strictures of a league format to keep everyone together. And at the end of the year, the teams that have the most points, both the teams added up with the total of their players, end up going to BlizzCon. And I think this makes BlizzCon an aggregate total of the best plays over the year, rather than the people who were just good from, you know, July to November. I think that's a lot more fair. I guess August to November. You know what I mean? So something like that could work. I think I'm trying to think if there's any other league formats that anyone uses that are like any good. I mean, the other thing is like you just have lots of online qualifiers. Instead of doing a league, you can just do basically like the open qualifiers, where people just play through online qualifiers for 3 or 4, and the teams with the most points go to a regional, and the top 2 teams from there go to like the globals or something like that. That could be an option. It's just The current system that we had was awkward because of the double regionals and because of the lack of double elimination. I don't think it was that bad for a game of this size because it offered the flexibility for rosters to change and for players to move around and teams, startup teams, to kind of build roots and grow. But it also kind of gave teams a chance to go to events and go to things like this. So like if you imagine some of the lower tier teams, like if you just make it to a regional final, that's money in your pocket. That's great. You get to go travel, you get to go enjoy it, and even if you come in last place, you typically get some sort of small prize. Maybe not necessarily, a very good cut of it. Is that true? I think maybe it just goes to the top four. Either way, if you can still get to the top four, that's good for you. There's lots of opportunity to do that, and especially in scenes where there's only 2 or 3 good teams, getting to the top four isn't necessarily that hard, and it's not really all that bad, to be honest. If our goal is more consistent income, I don't think that the answer is creating a more structured system with less openings for teams to get in. I think the best possible outcome is just have more tournaments where people can enter. More tournaments that you have, both online weekly tournaments or regional events like every month or something like that. Even if they're online events like Bloodlust, like if we just had like an NA tournament, like an online NA tournament like Bloodlust every month that paid out like 5K in total prize pool, like that would be awesome. That'd be amazing. We don't really need to gather all of this money. We don't need to gather like what is it, $500,000 for BlizzCon. We don't have to funnel all of it into these large events. It's good to have these large events anyway and be able to say, oh, like this team is the best or this team is the best. But the problem is you can't have all the money being funneled into a handful of large events over the course of the year. If you have more consistent regular events that allow the teams to pick up money along the way, that's better. That can give us things. So like I said, like these weekly, like the format idea that I had before, where you have like weekly open qualifiers that get you into a regional. Like each single qualifier, like the prize, like the top prize is $200 or whatever. So like every week, like I can win $200 playing in this qualifier. And then if I make it to the event, I can make some more money if I get into the top 4. Stuff like that. This is doable. The money just needs to be distributed better. As of right now, it's too top heavy, and the teams that are getting into the scene have a hard time getting to that slice of the money, and the top teams that are in the scene, if they don't get the top prize, they get significantly less. So it's a problem with the format overall, and I don't think that a league will solve it. I think a league will actually just make it worse, and we'll end up seeing a decline of viewership and popularity in Heroes of the Storm as a whole because of it. It's a bit tricky, and we won't find out for sure until next year, but that's my opinion on it. And you can argue with me, you can leave me comments, let me know down below. I will answer them to the best of my ability. I'm open to hearing other thoughts and other ideas, but my personal feeling is that putting a large-scale format into a small-scale game is not going to be good for the long-term health of the game.